So welcome to the June meeting. A couple announcements. Jeff Harder and Charlotte going to be sharing their garden. Probably late August is what all the details haven't been worked out. But all us East Bayers will be glad to go over into the fog in San Francisco in the late summer here. And then if you have a garden that you want to share, we would love to come visit and see all your hard work and see what goodies you have growing in your garden. So you can reach out to me, or you can reach out to calhortinfo@gmail.com. And then next month it's going to be a live in-person meeting. And this is with Rose Lovell from Morning Sun Herb Farms in Vacaville. And if you've not been there, it's amazing little nursery. They've got all sorts of herbs, all sorts of scented geraniums. They have succulents, they have ground covers, shrubs, all sorts of things. Not anything really bigger than a gallon can, but really nice selection and a lot of unusual things that you won't find necessarily everywhere else. So, and she'll have plants to sell too. So if you want anything in particular, you can get on her website and look and see what's there. If you want something for her to bring down to you at the meeting, just let me know and we'll just send her an email with all the special requests there if you want anything, if you want to shop and then go pick it up at the meeting. And we'll have a live plant forum. So instead of sending pictures, you'll bring either a branch or if it's in a container, maybe the container, and then we'll share what's growing in our gardens for July. Okay, without any further ado, we have Pam Peirce, who has several books, Golden Gate Gardening, which is kind of the very local information on vegetable gardening in the Bay Area. And she's in San Francisco, so she knows all the ins and outs of the type of microclimates we have and everything. And then she has another one on, what was the other one, Pam?
Called Wildly Successful Plants, 50 Historic, Eager to Grow Plants.
As Heather says, she's a plant whisperer or vegetable whisperer for the last 40 years an expert. She has a column in the Chronicle every once a month. Is that right?
They have told me they have no more room for gardening.
Oh, okay. Well, she used to be.
So since 2006. By the way, it's Peirce, Peirce. It's not Price, it's Peirce.
And Peirce, I'm sorry.
It's spelled incorrectly here. It's right on the book. That's what counts. Okay, so good evening, gardeners. It's a pleasure to speak with you this evening. I have a west window here and an umbrella up to shadow it. I don't know quite what'll happen because but I think the sun will be down rather late. So there I am. I have some light. I have a light if I need it. But I wanted to talk to you about the secret season, which is January through March. And I've dubbed it that because so many gardeners overlook it. And I wanted to tell you how to use that season to grow food, what to grow, when to start it, how to deal with its challenges so that you can enjoy the many rewards. But before I start, I wanted to be sure you know that my new book the new edition of Golden Gate Gardening is out. I will be showing this in the slideshow, but it is available in both bookstores and many nurseries. And it's the 4th edition, which is the 30th anniversary edition. It was published last fall. And that I have a website. If you go to my website, which is pampeirce.com, you can link to my blog and you can find anything you're looking for by going to the list of subjects on the right and choosing a subject such as recipes. There are many recipes. There are plants. There are pests. There's lots of pictures and information about pests and diseases. And just incidentally, if you have roses, have you tried the biofungicide Revitalize, which is a soil bacterium which attacks both powdery mildew and black spot of roses and has been used very successfully in our community garden.
What's the name of that again? I'll put it in the chat.
Revitalize. It's a strange name. It's a bacterium. It's a soil bacterium. Why don't they just call it something that has to do with bacteria? But no, Revitalize is what they call it. So I garden in San Francisco, both in a foggy neighborhood where I live and in a sunnier Mission neighborhood in a community garden. But I grew up in Indiana where the winters are quite cold. And once the ground freezes, gardening shuts down until spring. But when I came to San Francisco, I noticed that there was a pink rose climbing on the building and it bloomed all winter long. And I saw immediately that something was possible in the winter. So I wrote the book Golden Gate Gardening to share what I learned about gardening here, and I've added to it as I learned more about the inland climate as well. And the third and fourth edition, which the current one, have 4 planting calendars. 2 are for foggy and not quite as foggy neighborhoods, such as Western San Francisco, Eastern San Francisco, and then on to Berkeley, Oakland, Montclair, the whole inland area. And then there are 2 calendars toward the rear of the book on page 388 and 389, which refer to the areas such as Walnut Creek and San Jose. What's possible always depends on both your overall microclimate and the specific location of your particular garden. But I was originally inspired to write Golden Gate Gardening by a book by a woman named Binda Colebrook called Winter Gardening in the Maritime Northwest. And it seemed to me that if she could grow things in the winter, we certainly could. And I was correct. And so I've given you on your handout, and I hope you have that handout. If you turn over to the side that doesn't have color vegetables or have vegetables at the top, you will see something about the hardiness of various vegetables. Much of that is directly from Binda, and it shows you that vegetables are hardier, the winter vegetables, the cool season or cool preferring vegetables are hardier than you might expect. And they take a fair amount of cold. So I've included this information to encourage you mostly and cheer you up about the prospects of year-round food production. While my experience is with the San Francisco and Peninsula maritime climate, maritime meaning near the ocean, all of California west of the foothills has a Mediterranean climate in that it has a mild, rainy winter and the summer is dry. It may be hot, it may be cool, but it's definitely dry, which means it's Mediterranean. And there is generally more difference, or less difference, excuse me, there's less difference 200 miles up and down the coast than there is 10 miles inland. So Southern Oregon also, but as far as at least Eureka and down to San Luis Obispo is central for this book, and it can be easily extrapolated to the regions just outside of what it covers. So the terrain is very complex, letting fog and maritime air in through what we call fog gaps so that it goes further inland and as the maritime climate is carried inland, the springs are cooler, the falls are cool rather than blazing hot. The cooler air comes through and the nights are cooler as well, not in the Central Valley, but as you go, it is cooler if you go to the fog gaps, if you're following a fog gap. So at the heart of the plan for year-round food garden is my division of the year into 4 planting seasons. And I've listed 2 months for each in Golden Gate Gardening as the prime planting times. But really there are 4 3-month seasons. So I've said April, May, June. This is the April and May, and sometimes June is the planting season that we all know about. July, August, and sometimes September, October, November, and sometimes December, although there's not much going on then. We certainly plant bulbs then. And January, February, and March. Well, February and March more centrally, and sometimes January. And I've dubbed the February, March, and sometimes January season the secret season because it's the one that we overlook most of the time, that most gardeners overlook. And if you have a garden, the way to get it to be a year-round garden is to divide it into 4 sections. And it doesn't matter if they're the same size, just 4 sections. And put something in each of these seasons, each one of those 4 periods of the year. And if you do that, you will have a year-round garden at the end of a year. In a few minutes, I'm going to give a slideshow to illustrate what you can grow. Before I begin, I want to tell you several advantages of the secret season. One of the top reasons, of course, is to have something to harvest before your summer crops are ready, because if you plant during this season, you will have something to eat. About the time your summer crops go in, you're going to be eating something that you planted in the secret season. The second advantage is that during this secret season, you will be growing crops that need little or no supplemental water because the rains typically take care of that for you. And dry spells are still possible in these 3 months, but rain is quite likely to keep your soil moist, as it certainly would have this year. The third advantage is that many of the pests that plague our gardens, including that are inactive in that period, the beet and charred leaf miner. And here's a case where the climate crisis has not been helpful because it's allowed the leaf miners to live a little later into the autumn, which we wish they didn't do. But by the secret season, they should be quiet, and the root maggots of various sorts, the cabbage worms, the earwigs, they all continue in dormancy into March. So that's a big help. And finally, it is a season in which the crops that thrive are particularly tender and crisp. So you're going to have a lot of delicious meals from these early plantings. And I also wanted to say that gardeners often ask me, how can I plant in late summer and fall so that I have crops later in the fall? Because that's also a really good planting time, the July, August, and sometimes September period. And when they say this, what I tell them is the way that you have some space in your garden in late summer and into early fall is that you plant in the secret season, and those things come out at the end of June, certainly, and you're ready to plant something there. So you're ready to prepare your soil and let it rest for a little while, and then plant something in the summer and late and early fall. Or they may say to me, I don't want to plant in the colder months of the year. I don't like cold and rain. But I'm here to tell you that most of the preparation that you will be doing for your secret season garden can be done when the weather is nice, as you will hear in this talk. So let's look at some of the best crops for the season and how to grow them. And you will find your handout is useful as you plan your secret season planting. So on the opposite side, the side that other than the hardiness side, you will see some ideas for what you can plant during that period. And there's a chart. Also, I'm going to talk a little bit about growing seedlings. And sometimes it'll tell you in that chart to plant seeds outdoors, sometimes seedlings indoors, seeds indoors to grow seedlings that you plant outdoors later. And I'm going to talk briefly about starting from seed. But you can refer to your handout as I speak. But I'm going to tell you some tips for solving some of the problems of planting in the secret season so that you can get the delicious advantages that you will be looking forward to. And I think now is time to share a screen if we can do that. Okay, so there's the book. The first problem that you're going to encounter is that you will not want to go out in the cold days of late winter to prepare your plot for planting. So what I suggest that you do is that you choose a day in autumn. On a sunny, mild day when the soil is moist, spread a layer a couple of inches thick of soil amendment and whatever fertilizer you decide to put in your garden at that time. And I garden all year, so I fertilize my vegetables twice a year. And I do fertilize vegetables twice a year. Don't necessarily fertilize ornamentals because you're not eager for them to grow fast, but vegetables you do because you want them to be big and fat and succulent and tasty. And you also probably want to put something else in after you take them out. So if you miss that late summer time to prepare your soil, you can always find a mild sunny day in most of our region in February. We've had some very mild Februaries, which is unfortunate in a way because it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to have a mild March or April. This year we had a fairly mild February and a really cold March if you were around this area. But if you added plenty of high nitrogen materials as you made compost, then you can use your compost as a fertilizer for vegetables. If you didn't, you probably want to add a separate high nitrogen fertilizer, such as alfalfa meal or cottonseed meal. You do not want to purchase topsoil or planting mix or potting mix or anything of that sort to dig into your soil. You want to get something that's in a bag labeled amendment. And then you can mulch your plot. If you have homemade compost that's low nitrogen, that's an excellent mulch. Put an inch or two of some sort of organic matter that's easy to pull back or that will decay into your soil, such as straw. Be sure you get straw instead of hay, because if you get hay, it's going to have seeds in it and you'll grow a lot of weeds and some wheat. And the next thing you'll want to do is that you'll find that the shade extends further into your garden in the secret season than it does in the summertime. And so plan your garden a little bit so that you're using the sunniest area that's remaining in the winter to grow something that needs some sun. But this is giant Italian flatleaf parsley. It grows in open shade. So if you've got a house that shades your garden, but the sky is open, you can grow parsley. You can grow chervil, which is a herb that the French love, which is a little bit like, it has an anise parsley mix to its flavor. On the right is mitsuba, or Japanese parsley, which actually does not want sun. Please don't grow it where there is sun. It becomes yellow and speckled. Arugula will grow nicely in the shade. If you really don't like arugula, never fear. It's easy to grow and you can heat it. You can cook it. And it's just a mild green. I use it with ravioli or pasta and Parmesan and maybe some feta this is in the Golden Gate Gardening. I've written how to do it. Saute some onions, put in some wine, add a little arugula, but use it cooked because it's just another mild green. Oh, this is a mustard. This happens to be an open pollinated one that's very pretty. And those are all things that you can grow in full open shade, not deep shade, but open shade. And most secret season crops, including the cole crops, which is such as cabbage, broccoli, etc., and peas, and a lot of them will grow in half-day sun. So this is one plant that you can grow in half-day sun. So the next thing I want to talk about is the fact that rain can come in and make your soil too wet to dig. This is tarping a soil. This soil became so wet that it was not good to dig. And so I went out and I did this at City College when I was teaching, and because I could only have one day a week, and it better not be a day when the soil was too wet. But I put buckets upside down in the middle of the bed. This is my home garden. And then I put bricks and rocks around the edge. And I left that on all the time it was raining, and I took it off when it stopped raining. And it really did help quite a bit. So how do you know when the soil is the right moisture? This is more of a problem if you have clay soil than if you have sandy soil. But you can take a handful, brush off the surface, take a handful, squeeze it tightly, and then release it, and take the fingers from your other hand and touch it, and it should crumble easily, and then it's the right moisture for digging. If you dig soil that's too wet, you can puddle it, which means that the air is driven out of it. And if you drive the air out of soil, the roots, which every cell has to respire. We don't think about it often, but plants must respire, which means that they use oxygen and release carbon dioxide. So it's important for the roots to have air. So another problem that you're probably thinking of is cold. And we're not talking here in the region that I'm speaking of, even in fairly northern California or southern Oregon, if it's fairly near the coast, we're not speaking of a freeze. We're not talking about the soil freezing. We're talking about frost, which is it's below 32 degrees, but the soil is still not frozen. Plants respond to frozen soil much as a drought. You know, that part of the reason that plants drop their leaves in the fall is because the soil is so dry that it creates a kind of a drought because it's frozen. So yes, plants can be damaged by several nights of frost. For example, this kale went through several nights of frost and it looked terrible. But a week later, I came back and I found out that it had survived, and that although I lost a few leaves, for the most part, that kale is going to keep on growing, and it's big enough by now that it's going to make some kale before it blooms. So I was very happy to discover that. So if the night is below 45 degrees at 10 p.m. with still clear air, clear sky, no clouds, worry about frost, you can go out and you can use a row cover, which you can purchase from, there's an all-purpose garden fabric that gardeners.com has that I think is really good for our area. And you could make a bubble over your seedlings, or you can use a blanket propped up or boxes. And also, if you have something that you don't want to be damaged by frost very much or not at all, plant it where it won't get the early morning sun, because if it warms up too quickly, the cells may burst, and that way it'll have some shade until it gets used to the warmer air. And finally, planting and harvesting in the secret season can be cold for the gardener. And I recommend these Nitrile Touch gloves for working in the secret season, because when your hands get wet, when it's chilly out, they get cold. And I wear these, and by golly, my hands don't get wet and they're not that cold. Notice that these are smooth, flexible gloves. There are some nitrile gloves which are rather stiff and have a rough surface, like they have sand worked into them or something, and they're good for holding tools, but they're not so great for doing the fine work that you want to do with your plants. So for harvesting or something. So I recommend the Nitrile Touch. And they come in various colors, including gray with black backs and different sizes. So this just goes through some various crops that are good for growing in the secret season. Kale is good. This is a tall curly kale and a lacinato kale. Some varieties of kale are closely related to the same species as cabbage and broccoli and cauliflower, which are all the same species. Some of them are different species, but they can all grow in the secret season. And you can grow all the cole crops. Collards is a cabbage family crop, in other words, which is, it's easy to grow. It's one of the easiest, it's as easy as kale. It's delicious. I recommend using the recipe for couve maneira that I put into Golden Gate Gardening, which is common in Brazil, where they roll the leaf tightly and slice it very thinly and just barely touch it to a hot skillet that you've had garlic and oil cooking in just briefly. So it's still a little crisp when you eat it. And that's good. But I just steam it for 15 minutes and serve it with butter or vinegar or by itself. It's quite delicious. Does not have to cook for a long time. It's done, but it doesn't have to. So broccoli, there are two cautions about the secret season when you're planting the cole crops. One is what things not to plant. One of them is don't plant Brussels sprouts, because it's better to plant them after the longest day of the year. And you can set out little seedlings in July. That's okay. But don't buy seedlings of Brussels sprouts to plant in the secret season, because they will just open up and get aphids and be terrible and discourage you from growing Brussels sprouts ever more. So don't plant those in January, February, and March. But you can plant, and don't plant the kinds of overwintering crops that are available. They're wonderful things, and we can grow them, especially in the Bay Area. They sell them even as far north as Vancouver. I think one of the seed companies up there that sells them. But they are from northern Italy, and they are designed to overwinter. So you don't want to plant like overwintering purple broccoli or January king cabbage in the secret season, but you want to plant all the little short season ones, the early ones. So this is a broccoli that is a sprouter, which means that you can cut the central stem, and then I've kept them making side stems for up to a year and a half. And what I do is I go through and I search for good heads, and then I go through a second time and search for any yellow flowers that are opening, because the human brain doesn't make two searches at once very, very quickly, very easily. But this is an early purple cabbage. One of the best reasons to grow cabbage is how pretty it is. Snow crown and early cauliflower. The newer varieties of cauliflower are faster than the old ones. There are some overwintering cauliflowers, make huge, huge plants, but this one is a fairly quick one, and one that you don't really have to fasten the leaves over the top. Tatsoi is probably the hardiest of the choys, and one that also is not very popular among snails. I sometimes call it spoon greens. So I would set out sets of this January, February in San Francisco. Various mustards, the two upper right and lower left are ones that I would cook, and the other two, the feathery ones, are ones that I would add to salads because they're cute. Lettuces, always read the label on the seed packet or in the catalog or on the website, and look for lettuces that it says are cold tolerant. That's the ones you want, and probably best to set out small plants in that month. These are growing in February in small pots in my garden, and they're down where the sun first comes, because I have a garden that goes into shade in the winter. Mesclun is a very good crop for the secret season. This one has in it various crops that are, you can pick them out. You can see some arugula in the lower left, and there's a purple mustard, and there's a feathery mustard, and there's even a little hot soy up here in the upper right. So various things, but the reason that you grow it together like that is that you then go, when it's about 5 inches tall, and cut it about an inch from the top, inch from the ground, I mean, and it'll probably grow back once, at least once, maybe twice. And you can, in some cases, they're all salad. In some cases, they're for stir fry. In some cases, they're spicy. In some cases, they're not. And so I grow mine in a box, as you can see there, the wood in the front. I grow them in a box in potting mix because I want not to cut it and find that I have a weed in my mix, which I can identify, you may not. And so just to be sure, I put them in potting mix. Small radish is very good for the secret season. The large rooted types are not so good. They're better for the fall, the Asian types of radish. But the small kinds are good for the secret season, and the root maggots, if you have them, don't come out until the end of March, usually. So that means you get root maggot-free radishes. All kinds of root crops, no carrot maggots until late March. No beet leaf miner, no cabbage maggots in your radishes. That one is bull's blood beet, and I found that bull's blood beet is less likely to get the leaf miner than other beets. Leeks are very hardy, very easy to grow. They need to grow indoors 2 or 3 months, and they become little green threads, and then you put them out in the garden and they become huge. I grow jumper leeks, the variety jumper is very good because it's very upright, so I can put it at the edge of my small community garden plot and it doesn't flop all over the path, make everybody annoyed because it's hanging out of the bed. Candy onions. These were, well, let me go back to the candy onions. They were once sold as day neutral, but they're now sold as intermediate day. And I'll tell you briefly about onions. Onion seedlings also take about 2 months, and they should be planted out early. I plant them in February. If the onion is bigger than a pencil in December, if the stem of the onion is thicker than a pencil, that onion is probably going to bloom rather than make a good bulb. So you want to wait and not put them out too soon. Although if your winters turn cold fast enough, you could put them out sooner because they wouldn't get that big before December. But if otherwise, you better wait. So I put the seedlings out in February, and they start to bulb up in late June. So when they start to have lower leaves that are turning yellow, you stop watering. So put them at the edge of the bed or at the end where you can turn the drip irrigation system back away from them and stop watering them at that point, because it's likely to cause decay. And here is testing the onion when the stem is flat just above the bulb. You can kind of let it knock over, and you can see some of the dried leaves here that have, can you see where my arrow is, that have formed around the bottom? But it's starting to thin out, and that means it's just about ready. And then you can pick them, or you can pick them early and use them as spring onions. That's okay too. Ah, biennials. Onion is also a biennial, by the way, and it will start, it bulbs up, it blooms if it's bigger than a pencil by December. It bulbs up later in the season. You want intermediate day onions, incidentally, because you want onions that bulb up at our latitude. We don't have days that are long enough for long day onions, although up in Oregon you may have, but we don't. And you think, oh, well, let's grow short day onions, but short day onions need a milder winter even than we have, so they're not going to do very well. But onions are biennials, and on the rear of your handout, you'll see there's a little blurb on biennials, and it's there so that you can listen to what I say, and then you could go back and read it again after I'm finished and say, what did she say? And what I'm saying is that you probably learned an explanation for biennials in grade school, which was that it's a plant that lives 2 years and then it dies, which is true. But it is also true that a biennial is a plant that it only blooms when it's been exposed to a certain amount of cold. So the onion has to be exposed to a certain amount of cold, and that's above freezing cold, below 45 probably, after the stem is the size of a pencil. But chard just goes ahead and blooms. And at first it looks kind of cute because it's got this stem coming up in the middle. This one's kind of art deco, I thought. But it soon becomes quite ugly. And you can see all the big leaves are gone and you've got nothing but little leaves. And often, in many cases, like a carrot, the root is going to shrivel up and disappear, and the carrot will grow. Someone showed a picture of carrot with the lady beetle on it, but this carrot is 3 or 4 feet tall. When you read a botany book, it says carrots are 4 feet tall, and you say, what? Carrots are not 4 feet tall. Well, they are if they overwinter. So what is the warning? The warning is that if you have planted stuff, and you will have stuff in the secret season that you can eat at some point that you planted last fall, you will have some carrots maybe, or some leeks, or some kale or something. But toward the end of March, they're going to bloom and then they'll die. So you don't want that to happen. So be sure to plant them plenty early in the fall so that they follow the directions in Golden Gate Gardening, or plant according to your microclimate so that it's early, and then get them out before the end of March and eat them. I once worked with a community garden, and I went and talked to a couple of young ladies who had grown some kale, and the kale was about, a little over 1 foot tall, and it was getting ready to bloom. And they were so discouraged. And I never forgot the sad face that I got from this one woman. She said, is that all? And I had to say, that's all. I'm sorry, you did it. When did you plant it? She said, I planted it in November. Well, okay. But if you plant it in November, chances are it's big enough to be exposed to cold and bloom, but not big enough to make a good crop before you eat it. There's 2 silver linings to the problem of biennials. And one is that this collard is bolting, which means that it's going to flower, but it still doesn't have even buds showing. And then the flowers will open up and they will be yellow. But you can pick over the plant and take off these little shoots. They're about 2 or 3 inches long, and eat them. And they are tender and sweet and quite delicious. And they're quite a treat. And the same is true if you cut your cabbage plant off in the spring. It's likely to try to flower, and you can pull off all the little shoots when they're about 3 or 4 inches long and eat them. And the other silver lining, oops, we haven't got that. The other silver lining, of course, is that beneficial creatures love all the flowering biennials in your garden. They love the flowering carrots and leeks and onions if you are unfortunate to have enough to have your onions flower, and the cabbage and broccoli and all of that. Not the beets and chard because they're wind pollinated, and the insects and beneficial creatures do not pollinate them. But many of them either can use pollen or nectar, or they require it for their life cycle. This is a winter garden in San Francisco. I just put it in for pretty. There's a beautiful snow pea crop growing up there and lots of bok choy. I grow peas in the secret season. My preference is to grow snap peas because they're so delicious. I can't get them from the garden to the house very often. There are several things I want to tell you about peas. One is that, well, I grow snap peas too because you can eat the whole thing. You eat the pod and the pea. And so when you shell peas, you get about 1/8 of a pound of pea per plant. And if you eat snap peas, well, I sometimes grow snow peas because I like them for cooking, but if you grow snap peas, you get a heavier weight per plant of harvest. And you can let them get a little fatter than they are in the grocery store because they pick them when they're still pretty flat in the grocery, and they get sweeter as they get fatter. So you'll learn when it's gone too far, but you could let them get fatter. But a couple of things I want to tell you about peas. One is to provide them with a structure to grow on, even if they're a bush pea, because these are Cascadia is a bush pea. It grows about 3 feet tall. It likes to have some support, and it clings by these little tendrils that cling both to the verticals and the horizontals. So it really likes something like hog wire with 2 to 4 inch rectangular openings. It's not like a bean that climbs a pole. It likes to have the horizontals as well as the verticals. And make it a nice sturdy trellis too, because if it's too delicate, the winter storms, even in San Francisco proper, are so strong, they will just tear it down, which I learned the hard way. Don't do that. Another thing I wanted to tell you is that you can guide your seedlings to the support as soon as they're tall enough to reach it, and kind of gradually kind of give them a little help finding it, and that'll speed things along. And you can use row cover. I showed you a picture of row cover. Did I yet? No, not yet. But row cover is that it's called garden fabric in gardeners.com. You could cut a piece about maybe 15 inches wide and about 1 foot longer than your row of pea seeds, because pea seedlings in the winter are something that birds and snails and slugs and insects, they just love it. It's so delicious. And leave that on until and make a little trench around the outside of it, and then push soil up over the trench, over the row cover in the trench, and so it's tucked very tightly in. And then nothing can bother it, and you can leave that on until the peas start to push against the row cover, and then pull it off, take it home, shake it out, dry it off, knock off the dirt, and use it again. So that's my advice for peas, because they're really the most delicate, lovely thing in the garden for birds and slugs and various winter pests. Fava beans I grow, and you can eat the flowers, which are quite stylishly black and white and have a nice bean flavor. And you can eat the beans. There's a website called Earth Observatory, which has a garden, it's a recipe book for fava beans, which you can read online or obtain. And also I eat the pods when they're very young, before the beans have formed, and find them quite delicious, roasted. I really suggest, if you haven't tried roasting vegetables, that you do that, and get a book called Fresh Green, and I'll get it for you. I've changed all the recommendations for suggested reading in the back of Golden Gate Gardening, and I've listed a lot of new Fast, Fresh, and Green by Susie Middlebury, maybe. Because she has a chart there that tells you how to roast. And I'd almost want to say if you roast it, they will eat it, because when you roll a vegetable in olive oil and sprinkle it with a little salt, maybe some herbs, and then roast it at a high temperature, oh my goodness, that is so good. Sometimes you turn it over, sometimes you don't, depends upon the vegetable. Sometimes you cut it, but I use the young pods of fava beans and roast them. And they are just till there's a little brown on them. So about 450 for 25 minutes. Check it, but you want a little bit of browning, but you don't want, of course, charring, although the charring in vegetables is not toxic in the way that the charring of meat is. So it doesn't hurt if you get a little char here and there. Potatoes, we think of them as something to plant March 17th because of the history, wonderful and awful as it is in Ireland. But in fact, in Oregon maybe, but which is more similar to Ireland in its microclimate than San Francisco or Central California. But here we can plant them in mid-February. This is a bed that I planted. I dug trenches 8 inches deep. I put the seed potatoes, and we're now using whole seed potatoes for the most part, the way the British do. When you order them, that's what you'll get. Rather than cutting them up, you'll plant the whole little potato. I plant them at the bottom of the trench, and I cover it with 4 inches of soil. And then when the shoots begin to break through that 4 inches of soil, I add 4 more inches of soil. And when it begins to break through that, then I mulch it. And here I've got it mulched with straw. And you can get a very nice little harvest of potatoes. These are 2 crops that I wanted to include because you harvest them in the secret season. You probably should plant them in the secret season too. I would plant the yacon in March. It's a big plant. It grows 6-8 feet tall, has these big, soft, hairy leaves. And what you eat is these rhizomes, the roots that hang off the bottom. They're like sweet potatoes because they hang off the bottom. But this plant also has rhizomes like Jerusalem artichokes. They're also edible, but they're not wonderful. But this is just wonderful. You rinse it, and then you could use a potato peeler and slice up the center. I call it watermelon jicama because it is so delicious. And I've even gotten some production. These were produced in a pot, although I have to say that's probably more than 1 year's production in a very large tub, a large pot. Anyway, it's quite good. It's from South America, and I recommend it. And another good crop for planting in March is chayote, which is sometimes called vegetable pear. And you can buy a grocery store chayotes. I would start with maybe 3 and put them in a pot and in late fall and get them growing. They will actually, the seed is inside of them, and they will send roots out through the back end of the vegetable pear and root and send up leaves. This plant that you see here on the right is actually, this fence is 30 feet up, and this is a roof. And it has gone 30 feet up and then down the other side of that fence. So it doesn't always grow that big, but it can. And it get ready to share because it'll make so many fruits in the winter. But it's like it's like a summer squash in winter, and you can have it all winter long. The young shoots are also edible. Not that one I wouldn't eat because it's the very first shoot, but when the plant is growing in the fall and winter, I think you would be able to eat those shoots. And in Guatemala, they have so much of it, they eat just the tendrils, and they feel sorry for us because we don't have enough of it that we can just eat the tendrils. But plant 2 unless your neighbor has one, because it needs a cross-pollinator. It doesn't have to be, the plant has both male and female, but it likes having something to cross-pollinate. And here, close to the end here are 2 crops that I grow and I eat them in the secret season, but they're semi-wild. One is miner's lettuce, sometimes called Indian lettuce, which is a native green. It's crisp and mild and sweet and quite delicious. There are directions on my blog, and here's the pictures of saving the seed. You might still find some now in the shade, but you can also buy seed and put it on a wide newspaper because the seeds jump a little bit, and then collect these these little shiny black seeds and plant them out the following fall when the rains start. Here's another case where climate change has not been a help, because I used to be able to make a salad from that in early December, and now it's not ready yet. It's growing. It needs to be fairly cold before this thing germinates. The other one is wild onion, which is a Allium triquetrum. It's a Mediterranean onion, which many of us consider a weed. I hope you don't have too much of it, but if you do, start eating. Here it is on a cutting board. I cut it up and I use it in dishes, just like a green onion. I also eat the flowers and all parts of it. And here it is being used to make a soup stock. This was, it grows from about December to April. So this was probably done in March when it still had bulbs. They hadn't hardened off yet into storage bulbs. And I put in a bay leaf that I grew, and some parsley and a few herbs. And if you're not a vegetarian, a little bit of chicken bones or meat bones in it, and that makes a really delicious broth. It's a lost art. People buy their buy boxes of broth nowadays, but you can certainly make it from leek tops, carrot tops, wild onions, parsley, all kinds of vegetables and parts of vegetables that you have too much of or wouldn't eat, and use it for soup. And this is a salad that I made most years, which has in it winter weeds and early spring flowers. So it has some of the onion, the wild onion. The wild onion, by the way, you identify by these ridges on the backs of the leaves and the undersides of the leaves, and also the fact that the stem is triangular. They can hear the triquetrum in the specific epithet, the species name. And it also has a little green line. You can't see it here, a little green line down each tepal, each petal, each tepal. And it smells strongly of onion. If you have something that looks kind of like an onion, but it doesn't smell like an onion, you don't want to eat that. Another thing I put in here was some of the stems of Bright Lights chard, which I cut up. I call it kind of a vegetable confetti. There are borage flowers and Johnny jump up flowers, and there's some chervil, some variegated leaf from nasturtium. I would bring this to a potluck in early December, and it would come like that, and it would be like bringing a bowl of botany into the potluck, and everyone would go ooh and ah. And then I would take my bottle of balsamic vinaigrette, and I would shake it up, and I would put a little on here, and I would toss it, and the botany would turn into food. And I had fun doing that. Unfortunately, the potluck, they're not having that potluck, and the miner's lettuce or the Indian lettuce is a little late for the time when they used to have it. So haven't been doing that, but it's a lot of fun to make that salad. And I put the greens underneath, and then I put the edible flowers on top, of course, so that people can see them. I just briefly here at the end put in a little primer on start growing from seed. Many of these crops that go into a garden in January through March can be started from seed indoors. And there are detailed instructions in Golden Gate Gardening, which is a complete gardening book. It has something on watering and making compost and redworm compost and starting from seed and buying seedlings and transplanting, and all of that is all in there. It's a big book. It has a lot of things, but here are some images and some tips. Seeds for most crops start better in warm soil. And if you are finding that your seeds indoors, because you don't heat your house at night and you don't have a warm place, are taking a long time to germinate, you can buy one of these little seedling mats. I bought a small one. I don't have a thermostat. It's expensive and I don't need it. It seems to perform just fine. And I use popsicle sticks or cut up yogurt containers or something like that to make labels. And I'm sure to put the date that I did the seeding and the plant, the crop variety, the crop name and the variety on that label. And then if I pot it up later on into a larger pot, and there's very careful instructions because there's a chart in Golden Gate Gardening telling you what should be potted up. I write another date when I did that. So it's all on there. Water it till it drips. Don't water it again for a while. And don't water it until it drips for sure. If the surface becomes dry, you might want to add a sprinkle of water, maybe even daily, but you don't want to water it till it drips again until you've got something up growing and got some roots coming out. So as soon as you see the first little elbow, because seeds often come up this way, you know, they send out a little elbow and then they come up and it's white, even before it turns green or some color that it's going to be later on. That's when you move it to the sun. When the very first one shows, that means that things are germinating in there and you better get it into the sun quickly. These have gotten into the sun in time. They should be, unless of course it's a leek or an onion, they should be about as wide as they are tall when they are seedlings. And if they are taller than wide, then they may be stretched. So if you don't have a window that's bright enough, you might want to have a light. A shop light will do with grow lights, or you can purchase an expensive, nice looking one. But even grow lights and a shop light in the closet are fine. But keep your seedlings about 6 inches from the light, either by putting newspapers or something, magazines or something under it and taking them out as the plants grow, or by using hooks up on the light so that you can raise the light, one or the other. So that's when you water it a teeny bit when the surface has been dry. You want to turn those seedlings daily so that they don't bend too permanently toward the window. If you have a window, of course, they don't have to be turned if their source is a light above them, but in a window they do. And then at the final step, you'll need to harden them off. So these are being hardened off. And if you work, I suggest you maybe start on Thursday so that you could leave the plants out in the evening, bring them in at night for the first 2 nights, and then in the shade. And then the next day is Saturday. And if it's not too cold and if it's not too windy, you might decide to leave them all night that night. And then on Sunday, maybe move them into the sun or into an area which has got part sun or whatever they're going to grow in when they're ready to plant. And that way you give them a few days, 4 days, 5 days is all it usually takes to harden off plants. But you must do it, because if you don't, the plants will be too tender and they'll blow over, they'll wilt in the slightest bit of heat or sunlight. And a sign that it's been too cold for them is that, or too hot for them or too windy for them, is that the edges of the leaves will turn brown, and then you know that you were too quick on it. And if you buy seedlings if you buy seedlings at the nursery, they have been hardened off. And so you want to be sure to plant them without dehardening them. If you keep your nursery plants indoors for a few days, you may deharden them. And then when you are ready to plant them out, they are not ready to be planted out. So my final picture is a June harvest from the secret season. Those are pole romanos that went in very early. There's beets, there's carrots, there's a cabbage, that's magenta spreen at the top, very pretty green. It's a chenopodium. Chenopodiaceae, by the way, has disappeared. Did you know that? There's no longer a Chenopodiaceae. Everything is Amaranthaceae. But anyway, that's it. And I hope you have a wonderful garden and have lots of things to eat year round in your garden, wherever you may be. Thank you. And I'm happy to answer some questions if anybody has any.
Terrific, thanks. You guys can just unmute yourself if you want to ask a question to Pam.
I have a question. Do the things that you do during the secret season vary according to how heavy the rainy season is? We've had wild varieties of rainy seasons, so I'm wondering how it affects what you do.
Yeah, you might have to water, of all things. Usually we don't water till April, but you might have to water a little sooner. You might have, I lost a couple of really nice plants during that period when we had several dry winters, nice ornamental plants. So I might be out there watering a little bit more.
Thank you.
But still, even if you're watering more than you were, you are saving water, because when the days are cooler and shorter, you are not watering, you don't have to water as much as later in the season when it's windy and sunny and hot.
Yeah, those long days will try things out for sure.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Pam?
Just wanted to tell you it's wonderful. What a good talk.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm ready to get my book.
Oh, good. Yeah.
We want to come over to your house for dinner though. Well.
Yeah, I do a show on eating from your garden, which I think is a quite different skill than growing your vegetables. And I'm happy to give that if you're interested.
Okay.
Pictures of cooked food.
That'd be fun.
Makes everybody
Yes.
hungry.
Pam, I have a question on the carrots. I have a hard time growing carrots because you can't start them and then transplant them.
Nope.
So starting them what, in January?
Where are you?
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm in Southern Oregon.
I don't know. I think so. Where are you, currently near the coast, or are you inland?
Not along the coast, about 50 miles inland.
I don't think you're going to want to start them in January. I start them, you probably could start them a little earlier, but I start them in February in San Francisco. And I plant them in an area that has shade at that time of year, and they take so long to come up. There's several tips in Golden Gate gardening for doing something with your seed bed.
Okay. I have raised beds, so
Yeah, still. You can put coffee grounds over them, or you can run a roll of toilet paper, run it right along, you know, and keep that moist. But it takes 2 weeks or 3 weeks for the carrot seeds to come up. It'll take longer if it's colder. Oh my goodness, they take a long time. I don't think carrots are a good beginner's crop, but I for several years, you can see these little fat carrots over here. I grew these lovely carrots. So it can be done. And so by the time the sun comes onto that plot, the carrots are up. Now, then you have to worry about something eating them when they're little, because they're a delicacy, you know, and they're very tiny when they first come up. But you can succeed with carrots. But those are the problems. It takes forever for them to come up, and they are tiny, delicate little seedlings they're slow to grow.
okay.
And they have to be thinned, and but you can do it. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions for Pam?
Yeah, Pam, I have, I'm just harvesting my garlic right now and some shallots, and I'm just wondering, can you say a little bit about how do you know when, and
Yeah.
then how do you condition them afterward?
Yeah, I have directions for doing that in Golden Gate Gardening, and let's see what I could probably read it to you. The main thing about garlic is, yes, around toward the end of June is when that garlic is going to be ready. And shallots, they say, plant them around the shortest day of the year and harvest them around the longest day of the year. So that's a good trip. And they tend to die back for you. They're ready to show you that they're ready. Do you have a soft neck garlic or a hard neck garlic?
It's an elephant garlic.
Oh, elephant garlic. Well, that's a different matter altogether. An elephant garlic is a cross between a garlic and a leek. It's a different animal altogether.
Hasn't gotten
Garlic.
really yellow yet, but just wondering if I
Yeah.
should, you know,
Well,
tend to err on the side of longer or err on the side of shorter?
I think wait a little longer would be
I
smarter.
live down the peninsula a little bit, so it's a little
Yeah.
warmer.
When garlic is ready to dig, the leaves should be at least 60% brown.
Oh,
And if you want to check maturity, dig a bulb. A mature bulb has well-developed cloves throughout and 4 to 6 dry leaves wrapped around each bulb. So I
okay.
would wait a little bit. Dig up
Right.
mature plants carefully, brush off as much dirt as you can. Cure the pole plant in a warm, dry place out of direct sunlight for 2 to 3 weeks. Then clean the cured bulbs. Using the ball of your thumb, brush off the dirt and the outer layer or two of loose and broken skin. With scissors, cut the roots to 1 inch, braid the stems, or cut them to 2 inches from the top, and store out of the sun in a cool, dry place. For elephant garlic, you would collect mature bulbs as you would ordinary garlic, but check for small bulblets and separate them from the bulbs as you harvest, and refrigerate the bulblets for at least a month and then plant them in the fall. And they will not come up 20%, they will not all come up. About 20% is considered good, but after 1 year, those that do grow will make small bulbs resembling boiling onions. And if you leave those in the ground, during the 3rd summer, you will get the familiar bulbs with their several giant cloves.
So if I'm harvesting at the end of June, you refrigerate for a month, that only brings me to the end of July.
Says
So,
cure the plants in a warm, dry place out of direct sunlight for 2 to 3 weeks.
okay, that brings me to the end of July. All right, all right, all
Then
right.
brush them and trim them and keep them in a cool, dry, airy space. I don't know if that's a refrigerator, because a refrigerator might be too damp and cold.
Yeah, it's not dry.
Yeah,
Okay,
we don't have yeah, that's all right. End of
okay,
July is a good time to start using garlic. You could start using it as soon as you dig it. You don't have to
true. All
cure
right,
it.
thank you.
But if you want to store it, you want to cure it.
Right.
They start turning brown before they, you don't have to stop watering them or anything.
I would not water the garlic when it's
Okay.
starting to have yellow lower leaves. I would let it dry.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else going to pipe up with some questions?
And fortunately, our climate does dry out about that time, so
Yeah.
we don't have to worry about rainfall damaging our garlic and onion bulbs, because it's dry after April for the most part.
I'm Lorena Garcia, and I live in Lake Oswego, Oregon. I've been trying to grow a nice big onion. And right now, I know my onions, some of them have already gotten a seed head. So I've read some people cut them off and some people leave them on. But my problem is I never see the onion reaching the soil as is recommended. You know how the onion comes to the top?
Yeah.
And you know that you have a nice bulb.
Yeah.
So
you might be planting them too deeply. First of all, when did you plant? What did you plant?
Yeah, what did I plant? White and red, and they didn't have a variety name. And
did you plant sets
in the fall?
Yeah. And you planted sets? Like, did you plant
Yes.
small bulbs?
Yes,
sets. Right.
Yeah,
You know, small bulbs, the problem with small bulbs is they're already pencil size when you plant them. So they're more likely to flower. My best advice is, if you see a flower stalk even starting to form on an onion, that you dig it up immediately, cut it, eat it immediately. Eat the whole thing, because it's not going to get any better once it started to flower. It's only going to get worse. But onion sets, we can grow sets, and I recommend that people plant the smallest sets in February in San Francisco. So, and that they save the larger ones for green onions, and you plant green onions deep, so you have a long white shank, but so a couple inches deep, but you plant the sets for bulb onions fairly shallowly so that you can see the onion when it forms. But I would suggest that, you could buy plantlets of onion. And you probably get so many you want to share them with somebody. You can get 50 or 100 of them. But plantlets
Oh.
but they're a better deal. And also seed. And go to a seed catalog and look for your latitude. You might be far enough north probably that you could grow a long day onion. I don't know. And
Yeah, I don't know either. I keep trying.
and check about when to plant them, because if your winters are not freezing and you planted sets in the fall, those little sets will flower in the spring because they have been exposed to that cold. I plant sets in February myself, but I'm not there, so.
Now, I've gotten very confused because I've tried them from sets. I've tried them when the nurseries sell them. And that was interesting what you had said earlier about that.
Also, don't store your sets in the cold. Don't put them in the refrigerator. Store them at room temperature, because if you are growing sets and you put them in the refrigerator, you are encouraging them to flower, giving them more chill. They like it. Then they flower. I have pages and pages about onions. I have pages on different kinds of onions, and I have a whole page on onions and the climate that they're growing in. I have information on different ways to start onions in Golden Gate Gardening, and I recommend that you look at some of that information, because they used to say about farmers. They used to say about farmers, it was a high compliment to say he knows his onions, or she knows her onions. And so it is an advanced topic,
Well, I sure keep trying.
You can learn. You can
Yeah,
learn. Just
I will.
read the seed catalogs. Look for what I wrote in Golden Gate Gardening, and you'll do it.
I'll have to look at it. I have noted there's a huge community garden here, and I have noticed no one plants winter crops, and I do. I continually have something in my plot. They're like right now I'm picking peas like crazy. So thank you for your information. Very, very much appreciated.
Good for you. I was here and I said, these people are using books written for the East, and they're not reading books for our climate at all. And they need to, when they do that, they find out that they can garden all year. What an exciting thing,
Oh, absolutely.
Makes a big difference for sure.
Anyway, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pam. We appreciate it.